Well, greetings to all of you in Sydney and greetings from Washington, D.C. I'm sorry I can't join you at the conference this year. Congratulations to the United States Studies Centre for convening this signature conference, the Sydney International Strategy Forum. And thank you to Mike Green for setting what is always a difficult examination question. This year, navigating disruption. So Mike, in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'll do my best to navigate your question as effectively and as substantively and as diplomatically as I can. Let me try and do so in three ways. One, examine briefly the nature of the disruption we now face across the Indo-Pacific. Two, why I remain bullish as to why Australia and how Australia can navigate this disruption in partnership with our American ally in terms of our common security interests, our common economic interests, and our common interests in the burgeoning domains of technology, not least of which is artificial intelligence. And finally, why I'm bullish about the overall state of the Australia-US relationship. First, on the nature of the disruption we're facing in the Indo-Pacific. Let's be very clear that in the Indo-Pacific, a principal driving factor in the pan-regional disruption that we are facing is the rise of China, strategically, militarily, as well as economically. If we look purely through the military lens, the fact that China's defence expenditure continues to grow and grow and grow and outpace in growth terms those of the military outlays of other countries across the region is of itself deeply significant. If you look at simply one domain of that, which is the expansion of China's surface fleet, now the largest single surface fleet in the world, having passed the United States several years ago in aggregate size, and the manifestation of that surface fleet activity around the wider region, this itself has a significance. We saw that most recently in the case of the PLA Navy's circumnavigation of the Australian continent and its live fire exercises in the Tasman Sea. The economic disruption generated by the rise of China, of course it has advantages and it also has disadvantages. Xi Jinping's growth strategy is described as the dual circulation economy. If you turn that into layman's English, it's along the lines of China driving its own domestic growth model through domestic consumption and at the same time using what they call the great international circulation driven by Chinese exports to in fact also supplement that growth, but to do so in two particular ways. To cause China to become the world's factory and to export industrial product across the world in all categories of production, even resulting in oversupply. And at the same time, China itself not becoming dependent on any other country in the world. This is very much at the heart of China's economic strategy and across multiple sectors of its growth model. The result of which is we see Chinese surplus product being exported to markets not just across the collective West, but also into the global South as well. And if there is a third great disruption underway across the Indo-Pacific region, but frankly across the world, it is this binary technological race between China on the one hand and the United States and its allies on the other across the commanding heights of technologies. We see this evident, for example, in China's 2020 growth strategy, what's called Made in China 2025, launched back in 2015. And this covers the entire technology stack, including the entire artificial intelligence stack. And this race continues between these two great powers, in the case of the United States, its allies and friends and partners across the world as well. So when we're looking at the dynamics of the great disruption we are facing across the Indo-Pacific, it has these interconnecting dimensions. The second thing I said I'd address is why I remain bullish about Australia's capacity to navigate these great disruptions in partnership with the United States of America under the Trump administration. This is not just because of our long shared history. This is not just because of long shared cultural assumptions. It's not just because of common values. It's because we have such profound shared interests our two countries need each other, and that is recognised not only in Canberra, but it's recognised here in Washington as well. We need each other's militaries. We need each other's intelligence assets, irreplaceable intelligence assets. We need each other's defence industrial base. We need each other's trade. Remember, Australia, as of today, is America's second largest trade surplus in the world. We need each other's investment capital. The two-way stock of investment capital in each other's economies now stands at some $2 trillion. We need also to be mutually dependent in critical technologies and critical minerals and rare earths. We need America's critical technologies, particularly across the AI stack, and the United States increasingly needs Australia's critical minerals and rare earths. In other words, if you put together these series of core interests, they form the fuel, the turbocharging fuel, for the ability of our two countries and our two governments to navigate the great disruptions which lie ahead. If you look at the security relationship itself, it continues to go from strength to strength. Whether it's in the intelligence domain through a massive investment by the Australian government in red spice, if it's in the defence relationship with record levels of Australian government expenditure across our military assets and our military establishment and our military personnel. We see it in the scale of the defence exercises now unfolding between the two countries. Talisman Sabre, of course, has been going for many, many years. It may be less known in Australia that this year's exercise involves some 40,000 troops, not just between the United States and Australia, but involving many other countries as well. This is one of the largest military exercises in the world. We also see this with significant Australian government investments in Fleet Base West, that is, around HMAS Stirling and at the Henderson Industrial Precinct just south of Perth, where we will provide the capacity for maintenance for US submarine capabilities into the future, as well as our own submarines in the future as well, becoming a further and new indispensable asset for the United States Navy in the Indian Ocean, and therefore a critical component of the Indo-Pacific. We see it also with the large investment being made in Osborne in Adelaide and South Australia, where we'll be building the next class of Australian-owned built nuclear-powered submarines. And we see it also in the unprecedented investment by Australia into the US submarine industrial base, which by the end of this year will see us having invested already $2 billion out of $3 billion into the ability of the US to continue to lift its own output of Virginia-class boats across its production facilities here in America, where the Australian shipbuilding company Austal is also integrally engaged in that base through the design as well as the manufacture of modules which go into the Virginia-class vessels. In other words, all of these elements of the security and defence and intelligence relationship are going from strength to strength. It's one of the reasons why I'm absolutely confident that Australia will also navigate successfully the upcoming review of AUKUS launched by Under-Secretary of Defence Bridge Colby, as he reviews the legislation on AUKUS which was adopted unanimously by the United States Congress not too long ago, and of course on a bipartisan basis. All countries conduct reviews, and it's entirely appropriate that the US does so itself, as in fact the British did after the Starmer government was elected, and as in fact the Australian government did in relation to AUKUS in terms of the Defence Strategic Review of 2023. But I'm confident we'll navigate our way through this one as well. On the trade relationship, as I mentioned before, Australia stands today as America's second largest trade surplus partner in the world. We have managed, through our relationship with the United States, to ensure that Australia has emerged with the lowest level of tariffs, that is 10%, imposed against other countries around the world. We're also working carefully and closely with the administration with their series of upcoming so-called Section 232 tariff inquiries for national security purposes, which are currently underway through the US Department of Commerce. I mentioned before the investment relationship. already a stock of $2 trillion of investment in both countries, roughly in equal proportions. The new dynamic in this stock of investment is what is now unfolding through the investment strategies of Australia's superannuation funds. Our super funds between them represent almost $3 trillion worth of assets under management as the product of Australia's national savings policy going back some decades. This, to put it in context for an Australian audience, that $3 trillion sum is larger than the sovereign funds of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates combined. This therefore provides in the United States an enormous vehicle for investing in this country. And it's not just the funds management industry who are aware of this in the United States. It's right across the financial services industry writ large, and increasingly across the state governments of the United States as well. Our friends in Macquarie Bank will know this well because they've been the world's largest infrastructure investment bank going back some decades now, and a hugely successful presence here in the United States. But with that, we now have the turbocharging presence of our Super 7, the big super funds from Australia. And already with some $400 billion invested in US assets, and their projection is rising to $1 trillion by the super funds themselves by the time we get to the mid-30s. This is why I decided to convene the Australian Super Summit here in Washington, DC in February this year. That's why also we're partnering with the New South Wales government to convene the Sydney Investment Summit at the end of October this year to underscore Sydney's credentials as a future centre for the delivery of financial services across the entire Indo-Pacific. And why we'll convene a second Super Summit here in Washington, DC, but also in Silicon Valley and also in New York, come March next year. We intend to make this an annual event. I said I'd also speak briefly about critical technologies and critical minerals. When it comes to critical minerals, the United States has indicated that it wishes to become nationally resilient. This is where Australia, as a friend, partner, and frankly, co-supplier to the United States, becomes of central relevance. Australia equals the periodic table. If you look at America's list of its 50 designated critical minerals, including rare earths, heavy and light, Australia currently is in the business of mining some 30 of those, with an ability to increase its ability to mine in some 36 to 40 of them. We are also beginning the processing business as well. In fact, if you look at mining and processing, two companies, Lynas as well as Iluka, are now in the business of being able to both produce and prospectively within the next year or so to process heavy and light rare earths. This is of fundamental importance because these constitute the only supplies of heavy and light rare earths in terms of processed product and refined product outside of China. This is one symbol of where we can intend to take the critical minerals and rare earths relationship with our friends and partners in the United States, both in the broader civilian economy, but most particularly when it comes to defence industrial needs of the United States Department of Defence as well. This is a huge, burgeoning new pillar in the Australia-US relationship. And on critical tech, it was my privilege recently to accompany the Assistant Minister for Industry, Andrew Charlton, who's responsible for artificial intelligence, on his visit to both Seattle and to Silicon Valley, where we saw some 6 of the 7 of the magnificent 7 US tech/AI firms. We've already, so far, in the last several years, secured $5 billion investment from Microsoft into data centres as well as cybersecurity services in Australia. We've also secured, through the Prime Minister's recent visit, a further $20 billion investment from AWS in Seattle. More of these investments will flow, and the development of the Australian government's artificial intelligence strategy will be fundamental to ensuring that our country is upfront and in the lead of the global AI race rather than being left behind. And that's where our partnership with the United States is of fundamental significance. So for these series of reasons, I'm bullish based on these mutual interests, that the Australian government and Australia writ large will be able to navigate successfully with the United States the great disruptions we face in the decade to come. To conclude, the overall state of the relationship is in first-class working order. Prime Minister's already had 4 sets of telephone conversations with President Trump over the last 8 months, certainly better than my batting average when I was Prime Minister of Australia. Secondly, the Foreign Minister has been here on a number of occasions and met with her counterparts, including being only one of 4 foreign ministers around the world invited to the United States for the purposes of participating in the inauguration of President Trump in January. And the Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles, here again recently for substantive meetings with senior US cabinet officials, led by the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. So in terms of our connections and the embassy's connections with cabinet secretaries and the senior officials advise them, the machinery of the relationship is in first-class working order as well. So I wish you well in the conference which will now unfold, and I look forward to the collected wisdom which comes forth through you, Michael Green, once the Sydney International Strategy Forum is concluded. All the best from Washington, D.C.